Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alex Keisch. I want to welcome you all to the Weinstein JCC and to our program. Today we're going to have a moving experience on two different levels. One level is going to be an emotional one. We're going to try to take you on an emotional ride. The next part of the moving experience is going to be a physical one. We're going to ask you to follow the leader at the end of our program. We're going to start the program with a person who sings like an angel. She's Cantor Sarah Beck Berman of Beth Haba. Beth Haba is a Reformed synagogue here in Richmond, founded in 1789 by Spanish and Portuguese Jews. It's actually one of the oldest synagogues in all of America. We're going to start with Sarah Beck Berman. Cantor, would you do that for us?
I knew that was going to happen. Thank you. Okay. In your programs, you can find the words to this called Die Partisanerlied, or sometimes called Zog nit kein Mal, the partisan song, or Never Say. This song has become one of the preeminent Holocaust remembrance songs, and I want to tell you just a few words about it before we sing it. The music, the melody for this song is taken from a song written for a 1937 Russian film, and it's composed by a Jewish composer named Dmitri Pokras. The poet, the man who wrote the poem, the words, is named Hirsch Glick. He began writing poetry when he was 13. When he was 19, the Germans occupied Vilna. And he and his father worked in a forced labor camp, and he continued to write poetry. 2 years later, he was transferred to the Vilna ghetto, and he joined their partisan unit and continued to write. And his story goes on. But this hymn is one of his most famous pieces of poetry. And I think that when we sing it, you'll understand why. I'm going to sing the first verse in Yiddish, and then I welcome all of you to join in with me whenever you're comfortable in the English. Sag nit kein Mal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, Gott Himmeln bleiene verstellen bläue Tag, kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, es wird abheugt und unser Trott mir seinen do, kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, es wird abheugt und unser Trott mir seinen do. Never say that you now go on your last way, though leaden skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near, and our marching song will thunder, we are here, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near, and our marching song will thunder, we are here. From green palm trees to the land of distant snow, we are here with our sorrow and our woe, and wherever our life's blood was shed in pain, our fighting spirits now will resurrect again, and wherever our life's blood was shed in pain, our fighting spirits now will resurrect again. The golden rays of morning sun will dry our tears, dispelling bitter agony of yesteryears. But if the sun and dawn with us will be delayed, then let this song ring out to you the call instead. But if the sun and dawn with us will be delayed, then let this song ring out to you the call instead. Not lead but blood inscribed to this mighty song we sing. It's not a caroling of birds upon the wing, but a people midst the crashing fires of hell sang the song with guns in hands until they fell. But a people against the crashing fires of hell, sang the song with guns in hands until they fell. Never say that you now go on your last way, though leaden skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near, and our marching song will thunder, we are here, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near, and our marching song will thunder, we are here. We're here.
Thank you, Cantor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 80th year since Kristallnacht. We always celebrate a Kristallnacht service at our cemetery. Today we're doing two services. One is here and one will be at our cemetery. The reason we're doing the one here is because we want you all to become aware of us, who we are, and where we are. The one at the cemetery is a very solemn ceremony. This one we want to be a little uplifting because we are here. That's the ultimate revenge. Our oppressors are gone and we are here. Rabbi David Asher is the rabbi of the KBI synagogue, a traditional Jewish synagogue. He's going to be our family speaker today. He gave us this talk last November. It was so moving and so touching and so heartfelt, I asked him if he would redo it again today. Rabbi Asher.
Good evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out. I apologize that my voice is not as strong as it was before the holidays started, but we'll do the best we can. My objective tonight is to talk about my grandparents, to talk about my mother's parents, and to let a little bit of their life shine through, I hope, through words of mine that are worthy on some level. I'm the grandchild of Arthur and Ruth Eulau. Arthur hailed from Rohrbach, Germany, and Ruth hailed from Aschaffenburg, Germany. They could not have had more different upbringings. My grandfather grew up in a town that you cannot find on a map, and it is a small, poor town, and my grandmother grew up a Rothschild in Aschaffenburg, where there was 2 servants for every member of the household. He was a textile magnate, employed many members of the city. He was the president. My grandmother's father was the president of his synagogue. And my grandmother grew up with a very privileged lifestyle. Their story, like so many, is not just a story of death and destruction, it's a story of hope and aspiration and accomplishment. And here is their story. Arthur had 2 brothers. He was able to escape independently from his brothers hours before Kristallnacht. Had time passed just a little bit more, then he would have been caught up, most likely would have never made his way out of the country. They fled in different directions. His brother ended up flying for the Royal Air Force, and later, in fact, was part of the Allied bombings over Germany. He himself made his way without a penny to his name to New York, and where there's a little bit more that is known about my grandmother and her story. And what haunts me to this day is my grandmother's story. I never understood as a child why in the middle of the night, sleeping in their home, in Lynn, Massachusetts, that there seemed to be nightmares that were out loud. At some point, I had the courage to try to figure out why there were such nightmares. And I came to the following piece of information. My grandmother was the middle of 3 girls. Her older sister was married with a baby, Aunt Elsa. And Elsa came because her husband was in America and got a ticket for her. But she needed one other person, and there was one extra ticket for somebody to help her with the baby. And my grandmother was the recipient of that other ticket. And for the rest of her life, she never got over the fact that because some sort of fate, that she was a little bit older than her younger sister, that she in part was somehow responsible for her younger sister being murdered in Auschwitz. And that's what the nightmares were about. Thinking of her parents and her sister on their way to Auschwitz. Her father jumped off the train, didn't survive the landing of the jump, and her mother and sister, as we understand, based on research from Yad Vashem and other stories here and there, unfortunately were one of the many millions of victims, most likely through a gas chamber in Auschwitz. As the grandchild, I recognize that we are on the cusp of a certain moment in history where the responsibility falls on the grandchildren to make sure that these stories continue. There's hardly a day that goes by where I don't realize in some way, shape, or form their lives have very much to do with my life. There is no question that their support of the various institutions and their commitment to make sure that no matter what, based on the values that were instilled within them, that they would always be a part of the Jewish community. They never seemed to ask questions, at least not while I was around, about why this happened. I have no doubt that in some way, shape, or form, those questions were part of their lives. But for us as children visiting their grandparents, it was simply a matter of, this is their life, this is how they're going to get on, this is who we are, and we're going to persevere. I can't tell you that I've met anybody besides my grandmother that had such persistence and that had such a commitment to making sure that every day was lived responsibly and with integrity. Their story, as you might wonder, what happened to all of that wealth that my grandmother grew up with? Because she came to America with hardly a penny to her name, she was forced, and this is her history, she was forced to turn whatever German marks she had to her name in order to make sure that she could eat. The German mark, after World War II, was worth next to nothing. And therefore, reparations were hardly part of the conversation because everything that she knew about was turned in. But due to terrible inflation and the economy, everything that she had quickly went by the wayside. And she, who grew up with the silver spoon in her mouth, taught herself how to be a seamstress, how to make herself necessary, how to make herself worthy of being hired, and she did. She raised her family, she came to these shores, she moved to a town outside of Boston called Lynn, Massachusetts, and she and her husband, who never would have otherwise met except for their common history, they were able to raise the two children, my uncle and my mother, and make sure that they were successful. Always intent on education, made sure that they went to college. And my mother, she got her master's from Harvard. She became a French teacher, and she became anything that she needed to be to make sure that her family was successful. Every time I went back to Lynn, Massachusetts, and I went to services with my grandparents, they always made sure that somehow I was part of the service. I don't know how they finagled that. But they always made sure that I was leading one of the prayers, and there is no doubt in my mind that week after week in the summers, going to services with them, that had a lasting impact on me. Many of my colleagues or classmates, they didn't have that experience. But being on the bima, being there, perhaps had a lot to do with how I ended up on the bima today. But it's not just about that specific skill set. There is no doubt as well that the philosophy of making sure that the man and the ideology that tried to squelch our faith and our religion, even though they never said these words, I know that inside of me is that same drive to make sure that not only will it not be squelched, but the tradition through their descendants and through our family will thrive. I have to say that it's not easy to think back being 9 years old and hearing your grandmother scream in the middle of the night. And never understood why the nights were so strange. My sisters and I, we just kind of nodded, knew something was going on, and sure enough, as you get older, you understand. But there was never a way for my grandmother to fully appreciate what she had and what she made and what she accomplished because the terror, the horror was so severe. Hopefully over time, even though it impacted the next generation and it still impacts me, to take that drive, to take that motivation. And when I was studying in seminary, the point was made to me that if one person or one group of people can be so determined to wreak such havoc and such destruction, then the power exists within man and within individuals to make that same lasting impact in a positive way. There is no doubt that I also have many positive memories. After all, the baseball playoffs start, they were rabid Red Sox fans, and they instilled that within me. To the extent they passed down tradition, being part of Red Sox Nation was a part of that too. And there's no doubt that no matter what happened, they got up the next day and they continued on. And it's that kind of strength, that kind of positive outlook that also was passed down with the negative trauma as well. So I want to thank Alex for pushing me because I never had the chance to really speak about this in such a public setting. And I'm still learning what it means to be the grandchild of survivors. And it's hard for me to understand what it's like to be the grandchild of people who were removed from their country because of how they believed. Normally, when something happens, it's beyond human control. That's the way things should be. That's the way nature should take its course. But now, as a rabbi, and with a little bit of chaplaincy as well, you really understand how it can wreak havoc on somebody when somebody else does something to them, when somebody else imposes a negativity that wouldn't otherwise be there. That trauma would not be there if somebody else didn't put it on that individual. And that's what's horrifying, because it shakes your sense of security within humanity. But the more so than anything else, was the inspiration that they provided their grandchildren with. No matter how bad things can be, there are responsibilities, there's a life to be lived, there are positives to be had, there are families to raise, there are contributions to make to society. And if one group of people decided to take advantage of an entire people, then we should all the more so have the conviction to make sure that we make the opposite kind of contribution, a more positive contribution. With the Almighty's help, myself, my siblings, my family, my children will live a life dedicated for my children to the great-grandparents they never met. And they will live the values and lessons and messages that they instilled in perpetuity. I want to thank all of you as well for being here, helping me work through this, helping all of us work through this, because my story is just one of millions and millions of people. And I hope that we continue to make sure that this memory is a rich one and a positive one and leads towards more constructive efforts towards peace, safety, and security for all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was very beautiful. The story was uplifting, but even more joyous yet is the fact that his wife, Lisa, is expecting the 4th star in Rabbi Asher's heaven. And that's the ultimate revenge. We are here. We're living a good life. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw a wall a moment ago. On that wall was 461 names. Each one of those names is a holding place for many thousands of others. But it's a direct contact to people here, to the Zims, to the Lorias. My 2 grandfathers are there. Everybody in the greater Richmond area that has lost someone in the Holocaust has their name, the lost parent's name or the lost grandparent's name, on that wall. The seminal act of the last century was the Holocaust. We Jews sometimes refer to it as the Shoah. It was the largest murder of a single people in the history of our planet. But we're here remembering Kristallnacht in a positive sense. The night of the broken glass, the evening of November 9th through the morning of November 10th, 1938. Why is this night so special that we need to remember it? Paraphrasing Stalin, who approximately said that the life of one family, the life of a family, or a single individual, if it's lost, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing to happen. When millions die, it's a footnote in history. I can't quite digest that, but when you think that places such as Babi Yar, a place near Kiev, where nearly 34,000 Jews were slaughtered in 2 days, murdered, annihilated in a ravine and buried over, then what does Kristallnacht mean as compared to something like this? Why is it so special? Well, was it because of the 96 Jews that were murdered that night? No, that wasn't it. Was it because of the 26,000 Jews that were carted off to concentration camps? That wasn't it either. How about the hundreds of Torahs desecrated or destroyed? The Muslim holy book, the Holy Quran, is treated the same way we treat our Torahs, a living entity. Was it the dozens of our synagogues ransacked, desecrated, burned, and destroyed? It wasn't that either. Was it the thousands of books that were burned? No, that wasn't it either. Was it the millions of dollars of Jewish stores that were smashed, never to be recovered? It wasn't even all of these things put together. A little bit of a history, but first I have to give you some concept of a large number. To show you how total the destruction was this evening, the night bears the name Kristallnacht is because the broken glass, the smashed windows of the shopkeepers, the Jewish shopkeepers. Back then, Belgium was the #1 plate glass producing country in the world. Ms. Zim, if Belgium stopped all their production just to replace the plate glass that was broken this one night, they'd have to work 1 full year. That's how complete the destruction was. And yet all of these things together were not the reason why this night is special and the significance of this night. The story begins January 30th, 1933, when Hitler was selected to be Chancellor of Germany. Some believe that this is the beginning of the Holocaust at that time. Hitler was like the Pied Piper of old, with a hypnotic pipe, but Hitler's pipe was the pipe from hell. And hypnotically, little by little, the German people began to follow. Within months, laws were set in place that would limit the ability for Jews to stay alive. By November of 1938, Dr. Woods, there were hundreds and hundreds of laws that restricted the Jewish population from barely even breathing, from really living. But they needed something, a large calamity, to have them follow. You see, up until then, it was a few thugs, the black shirts, the Gestapo, the SS, and a few other thugs that would carry out Hitler's wishes. What Hitler needed was he needed a good amount of the German people to follow him. And his goal was world dominance and the annihilation, the murder, the slaughter of all Untermenschen, of all life not worthy of living. That not only included Jews, it also included all people of color. A young Jewish boy, Herschel Greenspan, in Paris, disgruntled the way his parents had been treated. They were thrown out of Germany, left in the cold with nothing. Walked into the German embassy, the Nazi embassy, and he shot a low-level official. That was November 7th, 1938. The German press went wild. This is what they were looking for. The Jews have shot the first shot. And they went wild for 2 days after that. The night of November 9th, 1938, at 5:30, it was reported that the Nazi official had died. The wilding, the destruction, the onslaught began. You see, this was the night that the hypnotic pipe of the demonic piper from hell played his song. And just like the lemmings of old then had jumped into the sea when the Pied Piper had forced them to do that, into their death in the waters below. That wasn't the same for the German people. They were good German people, but he had a critical mass of German people now who were following him. That's what he was looking for. And this night, the reason why it was significant is because they all lockstepped and held hands, and they went over that cliff, not into the sea, into a chasm of death, destruction, like the likes of which the world had never seen before. And please, if you believe in praying, pray that we never see that again. And there's no extricating themselves from that moment. The German people, good people and bad people alike, fell into that chasm of hell. They could not fight their way out, and when it was over, the German people themselves suffered horribly as well. Some consider this the beginning of the Holocaust. But the story I told you is why this night was significant and will forever be significant on this, the 80th anniversary of remembrance of that horrible night. A couple of weeks ago, Rick Nelson, the CEO of the JCC, gave me a book he thought I'd be interested in looking at. It was called Witness. It looked very interesting. It was a coffee table book with lots of good pictures for an ADD guy like me. I like pictures. It was things that I was really interested in. So I took it home and I opened it up. And as soon as I opened it up, this is what I saw. A poem by a young 17-year-old girl. called "And Still I Cannot Hate," Jennifer Staffenberg. She was on the March of the Living. This was in 1994. Here's the poem. As she walked through the valley of death and these horrible camps, she said, "I see bones and hair, shoes and glasses, while in Nazi hell ruled by the devil's brother. But still, I cannot hate. I see women's brushes, men's talisman, babies' tattered clothing. Still, I cannot hate. I see splintered boards where people lay their weary bodies. I see where people slaved and tried to exist, and still I cannot hate. I see death and destruction, but still I cannot hate. I can't continue this tragedy. I won't spread the disaster. I won't fan the flames that hate like that inspires." There's a Richmond connection to this young woman. Our newly appointed head of the Richmond Federation of Richmond, Jewish Federation of Richmond, is Daniel Staffenberg. When I saw this, I brought the book to him. I said, "Do you know Jennifer?" He said, "That's my sister." At our cemetery, you'll find a lovely sculpture. This was featured at the Valentine Museum. A picture of it was. It was part of an exhibit they had. It was Richmond monuments dating from 1607 to 2018. Linda Gisson's graceful and lasting statement, "Let life triumph." That's why we're here today, to celebrate the life and to triumph over the evil that happened 80 years ago. Another leaf from that book, The Witness. The March of the Living is an annual educational program which brings students from around the world to Poland. They each explore the remnants of the Holocaust. And although there were tears in everyone's eyes, there was in every heart a flame burning with hope for the future and the strength and the will to never let a tragedy like this ever happen again to anyone, anywhere. 1990, Shauna Zelig. Young people from all ethnicities are invited to the March of Remembrance. This is a very special place for many people here. It's our beloved Emek Sholom Holocaust Memorial Cemetery. It's the second oldest Holocaust memorial site in the whole United States. It's our connection to the Holocaust since 1955. Ephraim Rubenstein painted this, and there's something ugly, very unattractive in this painting. Why would he have put that in the painting? They're smokestacks. They're not pleasant to look at. But the analogy of they being there is very profound, so he left them in. You see, those smokestacks are from the crematoria at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. Last year I had Miss Utility come in and do their testing to make sure that there were no lines in the way where we're plotting our next graves to be. The irony that the only line that they found to be there, Cantor Helfman, was the gas line. I wear another hat beside Vice President and beside the chairman of the Emek Sholom, chairman of the Kristallnacht committee. I'm also the groundskeeper. I take great pride in what I do, and I was making a tour of the grounds early spring, and I saw these white flowers. I don't know if you can see them. These little white specks all over in various places. They're difficult to see, but I bent down and took a close look, and then I took a photograph of one, of a group of them, and I sent them to our gardeners, Dottie and Shannon, to discover these flowers are called the Star of David flower. Note the six-cornered star, scattered like so many pearls, and the blanket of our loved ones at our holy site. Please join us November 11th. It's going to be Veterans Day, but we have our program in the afternoon. It's going to be at the cemetery, Emek Sholom Holocaust Memorial Cemetery. We do many things there. One of the things we do is we give away $300. I don't think anyone here doesn't have a grandchild or child that couldn't use $300. All you have to do is do a short essay. Esther Windmiller of blessed memory began this program. It's the Never Again Award. It's not a scholarship, it's cash money. The green stuff. Please come. Every year we have a solemn occasion there, and meaningful people are there. You'll see a picture there of Meyer and Esther Binstock. Esther's uncle was Alexander Liebenstein. Some of you may have known him. A wonderful man who only had hate in his heart until the 1990s. All he wanted to do was kill Germans. What happened? And then all of a sudden, he realized that having hate in your heart was like taking a hot coal and trying to throw it at someone, trying to hurt them. All you're hurting is yourself. He made a complete 180 and became a loving, kind person. They even named a school after him in his hometown in Hallstead, the Alexander Liebenstein School of Tolerance. Bring your friends. I bring my friends. Dr. Edward Woods and his wife. His wife couldn't be here today. Ed is here today. Very many meaningful people are important in our lives. We cannot go it alone. We are stronger as a union of caring individuals. I want to show you a symbolic example of some caring individuals. This is at a synagogue in Oslo, Norway. It's the only synagogue in all of Norway. In February of 2015, 1,300 young Norwegian Muslims encircled the Oslo synagogue, symbolically protecting it. Why would they do this? Well, it was because a kosher market in Paris had been blitzed by an idiot and shot up by someone pretending that he was a follower of Islam. He was not. He was not. Here's how I know this. True Muslims only are allowed to fight in self-defense and not just defend themselves, to defend Jews and Catholics, because that's what real Muslims do. All sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of Abraham, every one of us. Now I gave you a possible example. Here's a real example of what Muslims do. Most of you couldn't find Albania on a map if I hadn't made it red. You should know where it is. As Jews, you should be thankful there is an Albania because they lead the way. You see, Albania, the one Muslim country in Europe, was the only Nazi-occupied country to see an increase in its Jewish population, an increase during the Holocaust. Albania became a safe haven for fleeing Jews. It is known that Albanians even competed with one another for the privilege of saving Jews. Not much was known about Albania. It was a very closed society because of its communist past. Finally, when the doors of communism were thrown open in 1995, after some research, the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. recognized the Albanian rescue of Jews. Yad Vashem followed in 2007, and in 2012, Senator Chuck Schulman and two representatives, one Democrat, one Republican, they presented a resolution that was passed in an effort to bring the Albanian rescue of European Jews to national and international attention. Anyone here know about it yet? Would you please help me pass the word? This is what real Muslims do, not that nonsense you read about in the headlines. We get many visitors, one of our most revered visitors each and every year. It just wouldn't be the same if Inga Hurwitz weren't there. She was there in the beginning. She was our president emeritus for 20 years. Thank you, Inga. Another friend of mine sent me a letter that he had sent to his children. Marvin Rossman. The letter was so heartful and so well written, like good poetry, good prose reads extremely well. David Robbins, a very accomplished writer, knows this. Two little excerpts from that letter that are important. He said, looking down from your lofty, organic granola and yogurt world, how do you perceive the Holocaust? Be vigilant, my princelings. Remember. Zakor, we say, Zakor. Remember the Holocaust. Why is this important? Why should we be vigilant? Because we're never more than one generation removed from this being the norm that you're seeing on the screen right now, rather than the exception, rather than aberration. Pray God that's what it is, an aberration. Sadly, what you see is not a movie set. It was captured A captured moment near a world-class university about 1 hour from where each one of you are sitting right now. In the winter of 2017, Jewish graves were being ransacked and desecrated. The Richmond Center for Inclusive Communities, in conjunction with Temple Bethel and Rabbi Knopf, gathered a group at our cemetery to spiritually bond us against this sort of action, to speak up loudly. The Muslim community put out a call for contributions to rebuild destroyed gravestones. Within weeks, $100,000 was raised. The Ahmadiyya Muslims also offered to physically protect every synagogue and every Jewish cemetery in our country. Thank God it didn't come to that. So it is each year that we gather, November 11th this year, 2018, the nearest Sunday to Kristallnacht as possible. Remember, that's the night of November 9th, the morning of November 10th. It's going to be the afternoon, 2 p.m. We invite you to come with us. We invite you to raise our voices so they're louder than those of the oppressors. We look forward to seeing you there. We have something special for you this evening. David Robbins, author, playwright, philanthropist. Most of you probably haven't started one philanthropy. I don't even know how to spell philanthropy. Mr. Marcus Weinstein, his gracious generosity makes this place available for us. He knows what a philanthropist is. David has 4 philanthropies. David said he wrote a 160,000 word novel about the creation of the state of Israel. There are some who believe that the Holocaust didn't end until safe sanctuary was available for Jews in Israel. He's going to tell us about his upcoming novel and perhaps read a few lines and leave the room open for questions. I know Dr. Woods is going to have about 5 of them. I see him thinking already. David.
Thank you. Whoops. Okay, cover your ears. I feel like the Tin Man. Golly, it is not easy to stand here after the cantor and Rabbi Asher and my eloquent friend Alex. It's not. Alex asked me to speak on Kristallnacht and show a remembrance evening, and I'm not easily intimidated. Well, I mean, Christ, look at me. I mean, I'm a fairly big man, and I'm not accustomed to being intimidated. But Jews intimidate me. Being a Jew and growing up amongst Jews, I never feel like I have anything I can say to them. Because like Alex detailed and like the rabbi detailed and in the beautiful song that the cantor sang, there's such a tradition of suffering and such a tradition of courage and such a tradition of endurance. As you say, we are here. And I just don't know what I can add to that conversation. And when Alex asked me to speak, I was reluctant because I don't feel that my contributions in the world are particularly keenly Jewish. But I'm glad to be here, and I would like to remark, any of you standing here looking at you would remark, you're a beautiful audience and a very diverse audience. And I know that a room full of Jews is a room full of kind-hearted and generous people, so adding to my sense of intimidation. I also am a little reluctant to tax your patience because you've already heard very beautiful stuff and powerful stuff. And it was my aspiration to stand up here and express some powerful and beautiful stuff. Yet I kind of feel it's already been done.
You can do it.
But Cantor just told me I can do it. So she must be right. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm grateful for an opportunity to be included in a community as auspicious and as enduring as this. So thank you for the platform. So I I do have one small anecdote I'd like to throw out in the philanthropic thing. So Solomon, right, he's laying on his deathbed and he looks up at whoever, I forget who, somebody tell me. I don't know. He says, remember that famous statement that all is vanity? And I kind of always wanted to just kind of snap my fingers and go back and like, you stupid son of a bitch. No, it's not. There's one thing that's not, and that's service. There's one thing that's not vanity, is putting your fellow man before you, right? Yes, if you pursue gold, if you pursue wealth, if you pursue power, if you pursue your passions, if you pursue anything that aggrandizes yourself, yeah, it probably comes up looking vain. But I just know the Jewish community and every one of you, and I hope and pray for myself, that when I put my head on my pillow for the last time, I'm like my boy Neil November. And I just go, I put my fellow man first. And that's not vain. So, apropos of nothing, I just wanted to say something optimistic in the midst of this evening. So, I made a tactical error. I did, in fact, have a passion project, a book I wanted to write ever since I've been writing. I wanted to write a history. I wanted to update Leon Uris's Exodus. Wonderful book, but written in 1959, 60. And it's a little dated, I felt, and there's a little narrative, I felt. And I said, man, the story of the establishment of the State of Israel is a really powerful story, very complex. And I always wanted to write that. So I set out to write an epic. And I did, as Alex said, it's 160,000 words. It feels like 160,000 pages, but it's 160,000 words. So the tactical error I made was, well, I thought, okay, Alex has asked me to speak in a Holocaust Shoah remembrance evening. I will select a passage from the book relevant to the Holocaust. But then that's been covered so well by the rabbi, and again, the beautiful song of the cantor selected in Alex's words. So if you might have seen me, I didn't mean to be rude, but I was panicked on my cell phone to see if I couldn't call the book up, because I was going to read a different section. But hey, you lose. I couldn't find it. So I'm going to read you something that is, it may be uplifting, because it is, I think, hopefully a poetic and brave passage about survival, about endurance, about we are here. There are three characters to this book. The book is called The State. The State. And it begins here at the liberation of Buchenwald in early May 1945, and it ends May 14th as Ben Gurion is announcing the State of Israel and Transjordanian tanks are lining up to come across the border the next day. So the book begins and ends with both in early May, 3 years apart. So there are three characters, because I always thought there were three miracles to the State of Israel, the establishment of the State of Israel. One was the political, one was the agricultural, one was the military. Couldn't think of a third, so I created a book that had these three characters. Character one, her name is Rivka. She lives in Kfar Tzion, on a small kibbutz named Meswat Yitzchak, Isaac's Beacon. And we see the establishment of the kibbutzim. We see, the moving all the rocks and desalinating the land through Rivka. The second character, the political miracle of Israel, is told through the viewpoint of a German-American reporter named Vincenz. His parents are German. They moved to America before the war. And Vince is based on I.F. Stone, who was, I see heads nodding, a Herald Tribune reporter who rowed a Ma'apilim ship, an illegal immigrant ship, to Palestine. And so we see the political miracle of the establishment of Israel out of Palestine through Vince's view. The third one is this one. It's Hugo Unger. Hugo is a man in his early 30s who is hours away from starving to death, and that's when we meet him, to a rumble outside his barracks at Buchenwald. We will learn that was an American tank, but he doesn't know it when he first hears the rumble. And Hugo is the principal character in the book because we start with Hugo and we follow him through his radicalization into the Irgun. And so rather than just following a Mossad or a Palmach, I thought, which were the venues for Urus, I thought, Begin would like this. And so I told the story of an Irgunist. And much of that is brutal, much of that is terrible, of course. We can argue, we can be sophists about the purposes of violence, and if violence is used to liberate a people, is it a fair tool? Don't know. I know that violence is an abhorrent thing in the hands of anyone, even a Jew. That being said, here we are. So I don't quibble over this, but I was fascinated with this character who awakes, and Hugo's arc, as we'll see here, Hugo's arc is, in effect, he says, as I think you may hear him say in this passage, the next time the sons of bitches come, I'll be holding a gun. And that is the motivation for this character. So I'm going to read you a chapter. Hopefully it won't be too tedious or too long. If it is, you're welcome to just get up and walk out. I may go with you and hand this over to the cannon to finish. But I'll read, bear with me. This is from my new novel called The State, which will hopefully be out next year.
Which number of the novel is this?
Sorry?
Number 15.
Oh, this is number 15. 15 novels. By the way, just because I always do this little thing I have here on my coat is one of the nonprofits I'm very honored to have started called the Mighty Pen Project. It's a writing program that I do in conjunction with the Virginia War Memorial, and we give free university quality creative writing classes to veterans. And I have learned to deeply, deeply respect and love veterans. And if there's veterans in the room, would you please stand and let us give you our applause?
If you can.
Thank you very much. All right, chapter 11, Hugo. April, Buchenwald concentration camp, Germany. Hugo awoke. He did not know why. When he closed his eyes, he believed it would be for the last time. His strength had ebbed. He lay behind his eyelids, trapped with his pulse, listening to it tap like a prisoner in the next cell. Hugo waited for it to stop tapping. Then he slept, or did he faint? He had no idea how long he'd been on his pallet. What use did he have for time when it measured only the living? Then his eyes opened. He sensed first his aloneness. Licking his unwatered lips, Hugo gazed into the gray slats of the pallet above him. No one moved there. No one crowded him left or right. His shaved head lay on the pillow of his overturned food pot. He cast his hearing out into the barracks. Only a creak returned, and a scratch, perhaps a rat jumping between rafters. Or maybe the big room was full, 30 to a pallet, all the coughing, twitching, and doomed men blocked out because he lacked the life to hear them. Slowly, Hugo's fingers traced the hem of his prisoner's coat. They climbed the spike of his emaciated hip, then under the coat to the cool corduroy of his ribs. These touches restored an awareness of himself, the being he'd lost. Hugo sniffed. The smell of rancid smoke was there. The ovens still blazed. He would take that stench to his death, no matter when it arrived. He glanced to either side, pivoting on his hard skull. No one else occupied the bunks. Far away, as though at the wrong end of a telescope, the German sun glowed in the open door, golden today. A rumble swelled outside, rolling closer until it trembled in the walls. Voices fluted, rising in volume and excitement. These were not at all like the sounds Hugo's time in the camps, when only exhaustion, grief, and the ovens had voices. Outside, men cried welcome. See? Hands fluttered around him like pigeons. Pearly teeth gave off the scent of tobacco. One hand held him upright on the pallet. Another hand rested on his shoulder, a third on his gaunt calf. A fourth man dashed away to hurry outside. A big, fleshy soldier talked loudly, close to his face, as though Hugo were deaf as well as starving. The soldier said, "American," similar enough to Americano for Hugo to understand who they were. For some reason he could not fathom, they put Hugo on his feet. Two soldiers supported him, urged him to walk. Hugo tried, though he was confounded as to why he ought to. He managed one good step in his canvas shoes, and his following leg buckled. An American caught him before he could collapse. The man cradled Hugo like a child. You carry him out through the door. The sudden sun was a shock to Hugo's eyes. Sitting up on the ground in the glaring light, he was forced to look at himself. His hands were bundles of white sticks, wrists and ankles, the joints of a skeleton. The pitying looks of the Americans showed him to be an unforgiving sight. Hugo marveled at the resilience of life, even his own. How hard it must be to snuff that it could live on inside him like this. He sat in a loose circle of Americans, some standing, some kneeling. To a man, they were decked in metal, their weapons, grenades, canteens, knives, bullets, helmets, wedding rings, buckles. Hugo wore nothing but skin and tattered cloth. The soldiers spoke to him and to each other, but their voices were like birdsong, distant and meaningless. Too weary to lift his eyes, Hugo studied the world at his level. American soldiers strode everywhere, pants bloused inside muddy boots. Prisoners dragged along in their blue and gray striped garb on ragged shoes. Some ran, but even in their running they seemed hobbled next to the long strides of the soldiers. A great tank idled beside Hugo's barracks, the thunder which had shaken his walls. All well and good. The Americans had come, prayers had been answered. The stink of the smoke was stronger out here than it was inside the barrack. The Americans seemed very intent on their amazement. Hugo didn't want this hunger that made him a pile of bones on the ground, didn't want to die. This was all he could muster, what he didn't want. Too weak to recall anything more. Minutes ago, he was certain. He lay on the brink and was done fighting. In the camps, Hugo had seen 100,000 go to their deaths up the chimney. He'd figured his turn had come, one more. He tried to lie back and see if he might continue dying. He could do it in the sun just as well. Before his spine could touch the dirt of the damned place, hands lifted him upright again. Hugo wasn't annoyed or relieved. If not yesterday or now, death would come tomorrow, or on its own day. That was Buchenwald. Easy, friend, easy. Others in the ring of soldiers retreated. The man on his knees in front of Hugo seemed to have taken control. He had a fair-complected face, lean and blue-eyed. Blonde bristles flecked his chin. He smelled as dirty as the rest. Around his upper arm, he wore a band, a P. You're going to be all right. Just stay with me. No more dying today, friend, no more. The soldier was speaking to Hugo in German. Hugo's hands came up on their own, recoiling as if the soldier were fire. The Nazis had left the camp. Now one was among the Americans. 999! Hugo pushed at him. The soldier did nothing to fend Hugo off, but endured the pushes, small things. Even with Hugo's useless mitts on him, the German speaker said crisply, "I'm going to get you a medic. Stay calm, it's over, friend. We're here now." Across his shoulder, the soldier yelled in English into the crowd of inmates and Americans past the growling tank. He waved at one soldier who changed directions immediately and hustled over. Hugo dropped his resistance. He sat motionless, sun-warmed. He didn't know his fate, swerving as it was between living and dying. The quick attack of fear had shifted him towards life for a moment. He'd linger to see what life held. Death was busy with the chimney. It would bide its time and wait for Hugo. Hugo whispered, marshaling all the voice he could. The soldier had to lean closer. A yellow pencil was tucked behind the man's ear. He carried no rifle, no grenades, no bandoliers, only a sidearm at his belt. His waistcoat was blank, no insignia, no patches. He was long-limbed, scrunched beside Hugo. Hugo rasped again. "Why do you speak German?" "My family's German. I grew up speaking it." By the way, this is Vince, the reporter that Hugo's meeting. The beckoned soldier arrived. A red cross on his helmet showed him to be medical. He held a canteen to Hugo's mouth for one long, sweet swallow. A handful of pills came out of a canvas bag and a tin of milk to drink them down with. The German speaker said that the pills were vitamins. When a passing American offered a chocolate bar, the medical man pushed it away. Then he had his words translated for Hugo. Don't eat anything these men offer you. No rations, no candy. Your stomach won't tolerate it. Tell someone to get you soup, fluids. We're bringing up a hospital and a field kitchen. Finish the milk. Hang in there. You're going to make it. Hugo needed help from the German speaker to tip the rest of the condensed milk to his lips. Emptying the can bloated Hugo's gut. He belched, a pain that made him clutch to his chest. The thin soldier rubbed his back, making Hugo conscious of his own knobby spine. The soldiers around him, the ones who lifted him into the sunny yard, faded into the hurly-burly of the liberation. The medical man jogged off to other cries for pills and milk. More American vehicles roared into the camp, more urgency charged the legs, churning past Hugo on the ground. The German speaker remained kneeling at his side. Hugo didn't ask why, slightly miffed that the other Americans had wandered off. He was pitiable and deserved some attention. Wasn't he dying? Apparently not. Hugo asked the German speaker's name. Haas. Vincenz Haas. The medic's milk had loosened Hugo's throat enough to form another question. His voice began to resemble his own. Why do you have a pencil behind your ear? Vincenz Haas grinned, pleased with Hugo's curiosity. I'm not a soldier. I'm a news reporter. He tapped the armband. Press. Lift me off the ground. I feel like an abandoned pet. Once Hugo was put on his unsteady feet, tall Haas had to stoop to support him. They found a chair against a wall in the sunlight. Camp guards had sat in this chair. It seemed to simmer beneath Hugo's bony rear, and he felt too weak to remark or look elsewhere for a seat. Haas walked off, leaving Hugo alone again. Hugo drew a breath that he sampled in his lungs as though deciding to take another after it. Life had returned with the milk and the Americans. Healthy prisoners walked past in their stripes, jubilant. They too ignored Hugo. Hundreds of the starved, men and women alike, stumbled around, many shirtless and without shame in the sun, to show the Americans what had been done to them. Buchenwald's production shacks and four-story barracks, stucco barns, and black watchtowers, furnace, building, and command offices all were emptied of their living prisoners who walked freely. The camp's guards were gone on the run, deserted the camp days ago, taking 20,000 Jews with them, surely to eliminate them. The sun had peaked into afternoon. The day was aging, but the world was new. Thoughts of death returned to Hugo. His life had been rekindled, but only barely. Where did Haas go? Hugo rested the back of his head against the wall. He stared blankly into the growing crowd as if he knew the path death would take. He sat in plain sight, brightly lit. No one addressed him. Hugo could believe he was dying again. Some small comfort crept alongside that. There would be company in death. And life, was it going to be like this? A can of milk, a Nazi's chair, a little else. Hugo didn't see the reporter until the man was already close, striding out of the river of soldiers and prisoners flowing both directions. Haas carried a second chair under his arm. He came straight for Hugo. Overhead, the brick chimney exhaled no more smoke. Near the main gate, before the clock tower and the iron red-painted sign that declared Jedem das Seine, to each as he deserves, a group of inmates hoisted two Americans onto their shoulders. Haas placed his chair next to Hugo. He held out a tin cup, lukewarm, when Hugo took it between his palms. Hugo held the aroma of coffee to his nose a long time before sipping. I'd like to ask your indulgence to read just one or two more pages because, thank you. Vincenz Haas asked to be called Vince, the American version of his name. This struck Hugo well, this man's embrace of America. It spoke of change. Hugo expected to be interviewed, but the prisoner didn't take the pencil from behind his ear. Vince propped his elbows on his long legs and spoke first about himself. This hinted at a considerate nature, as though he were respecting Hugo's frail condition. Vince Haas was 35, 3 years younger than Hugo. He started his tale in the middle of his life, a youthful stint in the American Marine Corps in the 1930s. He served 2 years in Cuba at a base where he did little more than guard duty and sunbathe. After the military, Vince returned to New York. He took a college degree, then a job at a big newspaper as what he called a cub reporter. In 6 years, he worked his way up from night court to crime, to sports, then local politics. Vince hoped one day to write a book. He left his chair once, assuring Hugo he'd be right back. After a chat with some passing soldiers, he returned with cigarettes and a can of apple juice. Hugo accepted the juice. Lighting up, Vince spoke with the smoke in his breath, an image that reminded Hugo of the cold cattle cars. Vince told of his family in Brooklyn. His father, an upright and honest man, lacked gentleness. His mother gave the family everything and kept little for herself. Vince worried she might be unhappy. A married sister, a brother who died years ago of infantile polio. When the chance arose at Vince's newspaper to cover the last months of the war in Europe, he grabbed it. He flew to Paris, hooked a ride on a supply truck out of France, crossed the Rhine, and caught up with the U.S. Third Army just in time. Hugo asked, "Just in time?" The reporter faltered. Hugo pressed, "In time for what?" He was aware of how he himself must look like the others, shuffling by, eyes sunk in gray sockets, camp eyes. In time for this? The reporter sat up straight to toss away his cigarette. He gazed beyond the wire to the easy hills of Weimar, brilliant in the spring light. A train track ran past that town, cut through the hills and forests to a platform, then a road that led through the gates to Buchenwald, to the workhouses, into the ovens for those who failed or fell or were chosen, to the labs for experiments, then up the chimney, into barracks that held 30,000 where there was room for 5. Vince, the American reporter, hurried here for this. He could not fathom it from America. Hugo finished the can of juice, feeling better. He had something Vince wanted, unimaginable. "Why are you here?" Vince dug his elbows into his knees again and linked his fingers. He spit into the dirt through the ring of his arms. "Just reporting." "I don't think so." Hugo tossed away the juice can. He wanted a beer, the first beer he'd thought of in a long time. His fragile hands warmed him. A drink might kill him. He closed his eyes to recall the last one in a cabaret in Berlin, an amber glass sweating on a table, a nameless woman in a crimson booth. The music, a piano, a violin, a male singer, and sequins on stage. That was all. The memory stopped. Hugo opened his eyes before deeper memories, more recent, could flood in. "Is this the book you want to write?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Is this why you told me your story, so I would tell you mine?" "I suppose. You don't have to do that. I'm not a child to be tricked." "Sorry. Help me to my feet." The American lifted him by one arm. Hugo wavered, but before the American could right him, he steadied himself. "I think I can walk a bit. Follow me." The smell troubled the Americans more than the sight. They covered their nostrils with sleeves or kerchiefs. None of the inmates who guided the Americans here did this, disrespect the dead. Hugo pushed closer into the stench so Vince, the reporter, would have to come that far. When Hugo arrived, his face screwed up, but he did not cover his nose. None of the observers stayed long. They got their fill and turned away. No one spoke. What could be said? The pile extended 40 meters down a hill. Every corpse was naked, face up, starved to death, stacked as neatly as could be done. The bottom row lay oriented north-south, the next east-west, and so on in 6 layers. The 800 bodies had been stripped of belongings and identification. Their clothes had been cleaned, stored, then given to German citizens who'd suffered in the bombings. The collection and cleaning detail had been Hugo's work. A haunted face in the growing crowd was a man who'd done this with him. Vince would not walk off until Hugo did. Hugo had no intention of being cruel. He turned away slowly, not to unbalance himself. The distance to the furnaces was short, as it needed to be. The stink of the stacked bodies faded enough for Vince to take a fuller breath. Despite being a reporter, the man knew well enough to leave his pencil untouched. Barn doors stood open at opposite ends of a 2-story brick building. The structure had nothing striking about it, the bland face of evil. An immense chimney climbed out of its midsection with no black plume. Someone had shut the fires down. Hugo entered for the first time without pushing a wheelbarrow. Vince stopped walking to face the imposing wall. He began to breathe fast through his nose, grasping for some control to stop himself from what? Throwing up, screaming, tears? Hugo had no empathy, no stroke for the man's back. Vince clamped his lips, visibly shunting something inside. He reached for his pencil now and slipped a notebook out of his jacket. He did not write, but sketched. The brick wall stretched the length of the building, 2 stories high. Black iron doors, a meter wide and tall, studded the wall in 10 groups of 3 doors each. The tops of the openings were arched in decorative brickwork, like a bakery. Each furnace fed into the chimney. A few doors stood open, metal trays pulled out. Heaps of ash covered all the platters except one, where partly burnt corpse lay. The fire had blanched its skull, ribs, and arm bones, melted away all hair, boiled off all blood. No other colors hinted that this mound had ever been more than stark white and black. Vince captured images in his notebook with some talent. He flipped to a blank page, scratched a rough image, then turned to a fresh sheet. Hugo let the American reporter record while he eased away to the wall. He flattened a palm against the bricks. Warmth lingered there. Through his spindly hand, he damned the wall. If he could push the building down, he would willingly die under it. For here was where he'd been intended to die. He did push, despising his futility. He came close to exhausting himself, and when he turned, he was foggy. Vince was gone. The man stood outside, smoking, fuming in the sun. Other touring soldiers entered the barn doors with their prisoned guides. Before Hugo left the crematorium, a spring gust drifted past the wall, a whirl of ash twirled off a tray to filter over him, touching his face. He shuffled towards Vince, his canvas soles dragged on the packed dirt. Of all the noises in the camp, shouts and wails, vehicles and strong orders, Americans pouring in to set up shop in Buchenwald, the sound of his own skidding feet struck him loudest, the weightless tread of a ghost. Only a week before, he'd labored in this bright April light to strip the corpses naked, then stack them. The ovens could handle 100 bodies at a time. Even so, the Nazis couldn't keep pace. Vince didn't turn when Hugo approached, but made Hugo walk around to face him. The man ground his cigarette under a heel. He couldn't raise his eyes. Hugo stepped close under them. Vince had shed no tears. Good. His sketches would be of more use than his tears. I'm afraid you're out of luck. A striped cluster of boys walked past, vigorous and looking for some advantage, perhaps vengeance, something more than food. Vince watched them go. This seemed to animate him to answer. How so? Yeah, I have no story to tell. What do you mean? A story must have a character. A character must have a past. Hugo pointed at the boys walking away. You see them? See all of us here. Everyone, tens of thousands, we were all different before the Nazis came. We had stories, the kinds you want to know. Now there are no families left to us, no homes, no careers, no friends. All of it was thrown into a bonfire the Nazis lit. Our pasts, our lives, the things that made us individuals, everything is now in ashes, indistinguishable. We are all identical, reduced to one new and terrible thing. No one of us has a past, just our own portion of the powder. There's nothing for you to find, nothing you can sift out. What all of us have is what you just came for, just in time. This. Vince was likely the tallest man in the camp. When he looked beyond Hugo, he seemed able to see a great distance. He may have been a very good reporter. Is there a beginning? Do you have one? Hugo rubbed his hands together. His palms were cooler than the bricks of the furnace. He patted Vince's jacket, a drunken sort of gesture. I need to rest. He would head back to his pallet. Meet me here tomorrow morning. Thank you for your patience. And that concludes my sad part of the ceremony. Look, God bless you all. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you, my brother Alex.
Done a good life.
And Alex Kaish.
Win Loria, where did your father, which camp did he liberate? All camps from Buchenwald? Yeah. So here we have a touchstone to your story. And, Em, I know you can hear me. I don't know if you can see me. I missed one slide. We'll share that one slide with you. It's the most important slide of all. We want you to see this before you leave, the actual painting, not just a picture of the painting. Anybody beside the staff know where it is? Anybody? You're a cast member, you don't quite. Okay. David's story, 500 some odd pages, will take you to Israel. Many scholars feel that this is where the Holocaust really ended, was at that time. Was when the state of Israel was created. And so, this next video is going to show you some of the joy of that state. This is what they call Taglit, which is done as a flash mob. The right of the Jews to return to Israel, to visit. In the weeks I spent preparing this evening, when I would get in a bad moment and down just a bit, this is what I would play. It perked me up and gave me happy tears as they did tonight. We're going to ask Cantor Sarah Beck-Berman back on the stage to do a very important prayer that is sung, and she'll explain it to you in detail. Oh, my back.
I think for tonight, I'm just going to read the English, and if you want to hear me chant the real prayer, then come on November 11th to Emek Sholom. All who are able, please rise. This is an ancient memorial prayer, in Hebrew called El Malei Rachamim, which means God filled with compassion. God filled with compassion, justice of widows and parent of orphans. Please do not be silent and do not hold your peace for the blood of Israel that was shed like water. Grant infinite rest on the wings of your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, shining and radiating light like the first light of creation, to the souls of the millions of Jews, adults and children who were murdered, all of them holy and pure in your eyes. May they rest in paradise. Therefore, Master of compassion, shelter them in the comfort of your wings forever. May their souls be woven into the tapestry of life eternal with you as their comfort. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Cantor. Ladies and gentlemen, Em, could I have magic over here again, please? This is our technician, Emily. She does the magic. Oops. Okay. This is the Emek Sholom Holocaust Memorial Cemetery. You may all sit down. This is an early version. It's a bigger memorial wall now. And we're going to have a very special service. The special service next time is going to be November 11th, and this will be our guest speaker, Alexandra Zapruder. Alexandra Zapruder is a member of the founding staff of the United States Holocaust Museum, Memorial Museum, and internationally acclaimed author of Salvaged Pages, a young writer's diaries of the Holocaust. Most of these diaries weren't finished. Occasionally a child would escape death, but it's almost like reading the movie Groundhog Day, where you keep repeating and repeating and repeating. You want this child to escape. It's a very heartfelt but very meaningful book, and you can buy it online, or you can buy it at the Holocaust Museum. The money there, when you use that, is a donation to the museum. So I encourage you to do that. If the name Zapruder rings a bell, it's because her grandfather did the 26 seconds of the video of the Kennedy assassination. He said it was the worst 26 seconds of his life. If he had to do all over again, he would not have been there that day. And then one last thing, and that is, most of us, as we get older, we think back, and the older we get, the better we were. What that means is we all move to the center of the story. We all have a tendency to do that. There's one person in my lifetime that did not do that. His name is Sam Schulman. I met Sam almost 2 years ago. He's a very quiet, very noble, very unassuming individual. He's the last survivor of the crew of the Exodus. And he's fond of saying that he's the only one who was not the captain. And because he and I share a bond of brotherhood of the sea, as does my friend Dr. Edward Woods, and are you still here? Oh, there you are. Why, we have a couple of King's Pointers here. So we have this special bond of all men who go down to the sea in ships. So he's a shipmate of mine. And because of that, I made him an honorary class member of my class. His health does not allow him to be here today to enjoy your company, but we can enjoy the cake that we made out of this picture. Now, what I want to do is lead you to where you'll find the portrait, the picture, the painting. I want you to see where it is. It'll be your touchstone with the end of the evening, and from there, we'll have a little nosh. Please follow me. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the painting. Here also is a J. Ibsen family scroll, a remnant of the Holocaust. It was damaged and it should have been buried properly, but we keep it here as a reminder of the Holocaust. Yeah, it's over here. There's also a Holocaust memorial.